Scariest/most unexplainable things people have seen while driving at night. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. About 5 of my friends and I were headed toward Traverse City, for a fishing weekend when we hit a Michigan road construction traffic jam. We were about 20 miles north of Bay City, so all you could see was traffic and farmland. After slogging through a stretch of road at 0 to 5 miles per hour for 20 minutes, the boys were getting restless. The AC didn't work, to boot, and it was terribly humid. It was one of those June days when it's threatening to storm, and you hear thunder, but nothing ever drops. We opened and hung out of the windows like idiots, engaged with other cars' passengers, and started playing catch with another car using a tennis ball. Like I said, idiots. Anyway, the point is that a couple of us were hanging out on the passenger side facing the roadside. Thunder rumbled quietly all around us, but other than that, the air was just thick and quiet. I zoned out and closed my eyes when, suddenly, a lightning bolt struck road debris less than 10 feet from our stopped van. I think the bolt struck a log or something similar because the pop that I heard sounded like gunshots and an explosion. I was so startled that I slammed my head into the top of the window and peed my pants. The second memory was like a waking nightmare. I went to college in rural Michigan. Other than the town my college was in, there wasn't anything but corn and soy fields for 10 miles or more. Total bummer for those that were bored all the time, a total boon for those of us that like to get high in corn fields. Campus safety was super strict about on-campus smoking, so my buddy and I used to go for drives and park on country roads. One night toward the end of our senior year, our roommates and most of our friends went on a school trip to DC, so buddy and I didn't have much going on. It made sense to go for a drive. At about midnight, we hopped in my car and drove out about 3 miles down a stretch of road, parked between 2 corn fields, and sat on the roof of my car to roll up. I left my parking lights on and the windows down. The stars were out, the weather was fine, and crickets and frogs were chirping. Perfect night. We smoked down a blunt and began rolling a second when we saw headlights coming. We decided to slip back into my car and act like we had just pulled over for a second. As the 2 headlights approached, I remember trying to hear the crickets and frogs, but it was dead silent. It was as if sound had been sucked out of the earth. What's more, as the headlights became even with my driver's seat, there was nothing behind them. There was no car. No truck or tractor. Okay, time to leave. But as I turned my key, a body about 6 feet tall walked out of the corn, about 20 feet ahead of us. It looked like a shirtless man, but it never moved his or her head or arms. It just walked across the road and disappeared into the corn on our side of the road. No face. Honestly, it was like the alien from Signs. My engine didn't start. I remember quickly trying again to turn over the engine and accelerating. I didn't think to roll up the windows, and I had the window lock on for some reason, so my buddy couldn't roll up his window. As we pulled onto the road, a scream, a high-pitched blast, or something broke the silence. My buddy swears that the body walked out of the corn again and just stood there as we pulled away, this time just a couple feet from the car. I didn't see that, but I did see 2 headlights in my rearview mirror. I realize we had just smoked down a joint, but this was too real. Needless to say, I never went for a smoke by a cornfield ever again. More proof of something, there were 2 dark marks on the rearview mirror the next day. That SHT happened. I sold the car the next year, but every time I look in the rearview mirror of a car, I can't get this memory out of my head. I wasn't driving but walking down my own road one night alone. I had tripped earlier that day and felt very edgy. So I decided for myself that maybe a couple of drinks and a short walk are in order. I was looking to relax and take the edge off, maybe have a smoke or something because I just wasn't feeling it. So I drink some whiskey and take a stroll down the lane. My road is rather short, less than a half mile with a total of 6 houses. They're dotted in 3 pairs, one across from another, and they're also equally spaced. Think beginning, middle, and end. 3 equal segments. I live in the middle, where the tree line begins to develop. This is rural middle America, so there will be critters in the woods. Deer specifically have an overpopulation in the area. Every fall, deer chronically cause car accidents. Anyways, I'm edgy, that's racing a touch just from tripping earlier. So I do a lap around our block, have another drink, and decide to roll a J because I thought this would in some way make me feel a little more normal. So I burn this J and instantly because I am very paranoid and extra aware of my surroundings. I had been smoking and walking because, like I said, my whole mood in one word was agitated. I'm now at the mouth of my road, a jazz cigarette in my mouth, taking a whiz. Everything up until this moment has seemed mundane to me, but pausing in the moment to take a piss has consumed me in dread. I felt watched, my hair stood on end, like watching a small child pet an animal far too hard and in the wrong direction. Something was different happening, and even if I didn't know what, it just felt wrong. Mid-pee, I hear something walking on the road towards me. It was more than a single entity, it was a group of several things that sound like they happen to be picking up speed, trotting now directly at me. All I can remember is that whatever I was sharing the road with that night sounded like they had hard surfaces on the bottom of their feet. There was an audible tap that clicked on the surface of the road. Now it's fight or flight time, baby. I consider my situation to be intoxicated, in deer court, in the darkness, literally sitting there with my dick in my hand. My options are moot. I spit out a still lit joint, scramble to pinch off this glorious drunk piss I'd been taking, and I bounce. Barefoot. You can heat the soles of my feet, slapping pavement. I match my pace of 2 to 1 to the pack that's in pursuit. Fueled by the fear of darkness and a will to not dance with a group of people who'd done anything, I just knew putting distance between me and those footsteps was important. Back to the safety and security of my home, I go. On the double. I bet there must have been sparks coming off my heels. High from outrunning a horde of mysterious monsters, presumably spawned directly from concentrated darkness. I hatch a plan. I, being a drunken monkey, feel the need to protect my nest from foreign invaders. Armed with my trusty, Wilson 9-iron slung over my right shoulder, I am now on the offense. Mounting our red picnic to establish the high ground, I begin to beat my chest. I'm wondering if I can create enough sounds of terror and present myself as a large picnic table race of people, the type that comes cocked ready with golf clubs. Prepared to swing for the fences, slugging any horned fuck-faced anything that comes in range. This is where the light bulbs come on, first surrounding me and then in my own head. Sheriff's Department. Drop your fucking weapon and get on the ground. I collapse onto the tabletop. I was like, fuck, the jig is up, convinced that I had just put on a manhunt and was now being arrested. Staring into Glocks, all with one in the pipe, I surrender. So apparently the neighbors at the end of the road had a fight, and some guys called the police. So when they arrive on scene, they are planning to take a walk up the street, combing for their suspect. Now imagine finding a 20-something drunk guy taking a sharp piss on pishes, smoking pot, and basically not being coherent enough to give a fuck. Lol, even if this guy isn't matching the description given, he's probably checking enough boxes where you're going to go fuck with him. So now the story reads in reverse. From the prospective officer's perspective, they've just spooked a dude, and now he's on foot, sprinting away from them. Fast as fuck, this kid runs up a house, grabs a golf club, and hops atop a table, swinging his club, looking like he is trying to fight the goddamn air. He was literally beating his chest like a gorilla, making a racket, and definitely not speaking any language at this point. It's just a collection of grunts and groans. Long story short, this was the night where my luck had balanced perfectly, at least in this timeline. I'm sure a few versions of me got shot that night. In hindsight, this was just a misunderstanding, but as it developed, these events were very unexplained. About 2 months ago, 2 former co-workers and I were on our way home to North Georgia from a business trip in Jacksonville, Florida. We decided to leave late in the day as we had been in Florida working for about a month straight, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah, it was a garbage place to work, so as you can imagine, we were quite ready to get home. Now that it's a very long drive from Florida to North Georgia, it especially feels so when you leave at almost 7 p.m., so by the time we actually get within the area close to our office, it's close to 2 a.m. If you've ever been to North Georgia, you know it's just miles and miles of backroads with almost nothing but trees and some houses sparsely spread around said backroads. So on one of these backroads, my friend driving had to pee really badly, and there were no places to stop at a restroom, so we had to stop on the side of the road in the middle of the woods next to a steep drop-off near a very small, old house with a dimly lit front porch. So finally my friend gets out to pee and I'm just sitting there with the window rolled down next to me whilst on my phone. They were heavy smokers so I kept my window down at all times practically, but then I heard in the darkness of the woods a very strange sound, almost like an owl but different in a way that's hard to describe, so I look around and notice that even though it was a full moon that night, it was dark, unnaturally dark even on the road where there was nothing covering the moon, not even clouds. I then looked towards my friend who was standing outside the truck, and no joke, I saw a shadow, a full-bodied shadow, pass by him, a shadow in the shape of a man, almost. He quickly ran back to the truck, as he not only saw it but felt it as well. He put the truck in drive and floored it, speeding out of there as fast as we could. Our other coworker didn't see it and asked what that was about. After telling him, he explained to us that he'd had this very uneasy feeling when we pulled up there, and then we told each other we felt the same. I'm not exaggerating that on that one particular road, I've never felt more dread or malice in my entire life. It was one of the strongest sensations I've ever felt, and then when we got off the road, the feeling completely disappeared, as did the almost blinding darkness. Obviously, I was still frightened, but the other feelings just instantly drove me off. To this day, I do everything I can to avoid going down that road. Years ago, 2 friends and I were driving down to the Outer Banks from Virginia late at night. Once you cross into North Carolina, the beach highway gets pretty rural, nothing around for miles, and it gets pitch black. We were chugging along when suddenly my friend driving muttered, "What the fuck?" and started to slow down. We looked out the windshield and saw a woman with dark hair and a torn-up white dress just standing on the side of the road with her back to us. We slowed way down, but she still didn't turn around. When we were right behind her, my friend rolled down the window a little and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" This bitch whipped around and let out the loudest, poltergeist-ass scream I've ever heard. I've never seen a banshee, but I'm pretty sure that's what they look and sound like. Black hair, pale skin, and black eyes. I peed a little. She ran across the road in front of the car, still screaming, and disappeared into the woods. My friend hit the gas pedal, and we got the fuck out of there. I would have seriously doubted my own sanity if 2 other people hadn't witnessed it. She looked like a freaking demon. Once we got a cell phone signal again, we called the local police and reported it. It turns out there was a beach house off the road nearby that a special needs group was staying at, and one of the mentally handicapped women had wandered off and gotten lost. I felt bad that we left her once we knew what was going on, but damn if I didn't think that bitch was possessed at the time. When my parents were still together, we used to take weekends all the time and go to my aunt's place out in Buttnutter Backwoods, Ontario. I forget what the place was called. My aunt lived right outside one of those small towns there, and the family was drinking. My dad, being the least intoxicated, decided to go get more beer. He took me with him. I was like 14-ish. Unfortunately, this town didn't have a store open past 5 p.m., so we had to drive all the way to the highway to go to a 24-hour IGA supermarket. So we go, grab the beer, and go back. Now, on the way back, a fog starts to roll in. It makes sense: hot, humid days, cool nights, country farms with manure everywhere, the usual. So we're driving down this winding, lightless, empty road where there's just tall grass and trees on either side when, all of a sudden, as we were going about 50 to 60, a woman steps out of the tall grass, a good 20 meters from us. I have never experienced a breakup so hard in my life. My dad screams and slams the pedal, and we go jutting forward, the car screeching across the road, so much so that we could kiss the ditch if we wanted to, then come to a stop. We look up, and through the fog, we see nothing. Dad thinks we might have hit her or something. Ike. So he leaves the car and calls out into the tall grass. Nothing answers. Now I am visibly shaken. I just saw this ghostly white woman with features that look smeared standing face forward in our oncoming car. I could have peed myself if I had it in me. I yell at my dad to get back in the car. He does. He closes the door, and he stares straight for a bit, gripping the steering wheel as if to level himself. He then looks at me and asks if I saw what he saw. I nod, and he just starts the car, and we drive back to my aunt's. We didn't talk about it for years, and when we did, we could both recall it like it was yesterday. We never saw her again, and since the divorce, I haven't gone down that way. I used to visit my girlfriend at her college, a couple hours away from mine. It was in a very rural area. I usually drive back the same way, but I needed my GPS to get to the highway. This was around 2 a.m. This time my phone was nearly dead, so I used my old navigation GPS, and it took me a different way, out the other side of the campus and through a long, winding road in the woods. It was very dark, and the only light was from my high beams. There were some houses here and there, but after a while, I started to notice that a lot of the houses had statues of humans on their lawns, very close to the road. As I drove further, I started to see what looked like potato sacks covering many of the statues' heads. At this point I had been on the road for over 30 minutes and had passed only 1 or 2 side roads, and those may have been long driveways. It got really creepy when I saw a group of 3 statues, one of which looked like it was a child but had some kind of pig mask on it. The other 2 had sacks on their heads as well. I was only going about 20 miles per hour, it was a very winding road, and it looked like someone had put an actual pig's head on it. As soon as I passed the 3, floodlights came on. At first, I didn't think anything of it, lots of people have automatic floodlights. But then I thought, why are they pointed straight at the road? Up until now, I hadn't seen any other cars. Seconds later, I noticed 2 people running towards the road through the woods, wearing sacks on their heads. They were running straight to the road, and I booked it immediately, which doubled my speed. About 5 minutes later, my girlfriend called me to say goodnight. I definitely shouldn't have said anything, but I was creeped out and described what happened. She started to yell at me, but before I could finish the conversation, I noticed lights in the distance behind me. A car was coming up behind me fast. Way too fast, and I was already going dangerously fast. I dropped the phone and focused all my efforts on driving. As it got closer, I noticed the car was a truck, and it had a bright-ass light bar on top, which looked like 4 high beams blinding me. I could hear a lot of noise, which I thought could be music. But as they got closer, I could tell it was yelling and possibly chanting. They got right up on my ass, and that's when I saw it. A bunch of people wearing sacks on their heads, leaning out of their windows, yelling and screaming. The driver had a pig head on him. I was sweating just trying to stay on the road, when I saw them try to go around me. I didn't let them. They tried again and again, swerving left and right to try to get a chance, but I stayed right in front of them. Every time they swerved, I saw a second, smaller car behind them, also with people wearing sacks on their heads, hanging out the windows and yelling. A couple of them seemed to have baseball bats. I'm the guy who normally lets people pass me if they're faster, but this looked like they definitely wanted to get around me and trap me in between them. Finally, I decided to do something stupid, and I opened my sunroof and tossed out a box of Kleenex. It was all I had. I saw it hit the car, and the tissues flew out everywhere. They were completely unfazed but started honking and yelling louder. They suddenly turned off all of their lights and started to get really damn close to me. They bumped the back of my car and even scratched up the sides as they tried to get around me. Let me tell you, in my entire life, I had never seen anything as creepy as these sack faces lit up by my red rear lights as they tried to run me off the road. That part lasted for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I remember thinking how I wish I had a gun or anything to defend myself because these people were fucking nuts. But I finally saw some streetlights in the distance up ahead and a tiny little bridge. As I crossed the bridge, they stopped and turned around. The highway exit was across the bridge, and I finally felt safe and drove back to school. When I finally spoke to my girlfriend again, she told me there were no statues on that road. But the scratches are still on my car 8 years later. I used to have problems with insomnia when I was in my 20s. My method of dealing with it was to go driving along the old state highways. At the time, I lived 36 miles north of Atlanta, and my route that night was to take the old state highway 41 north. This was when GPS was new and expensive technology, and North Georgia has never had good signage. So somewhere south of Dalton, Georgia, I think, I realized I had taken a wrong turn at some point and was lost. The road I was on ended at a T-junction. I turned right onto a road that wasn't great for turning around. It was narrow. To the left was a steep uphill, and there was no shoulder on the right. I just sort of drove for a bit longer, looking for somewhere to turn around. A minute or so later, I saw some oddly orangish light uphill. I drove until there was a little parting in the trees, and it was a huge KKK rally, easily 100 guys in robes, a dozen burning crosses. On one side, my great-grandfather was a railroad conductor in the Tennessee mountains. He was a bear of a man, and a hard one to boot. One of the ones on the other side was in the Knights of the White Camellia. Those bastards were worse than the KKK. They killed people. But me, no. Me and my green 4-cylinder Camrila. Me, who looked just a bit Jewish with my thin face and long, wavy or curly hair and glasses. Me without a cell phone and only a general understanding that I was probably driving mostly east. I put my foot down and drove on at a slightly above safe speed. I drove on until I spotted a gravel lot with 2 cars parked right before the driveway. I could at least turn around there. I slowed to turn in, turned my head to spy the corner, and looked dead in the eyes of the 2 guys standing between the trucks negotiating a drug deal. One had a darn brick of something still in his hands. I thought to myself, I guess they were expecting someone else. And that's when I found out that you really can spin the wheels in a 4-cylinder mid-90s Camry. And now I see those 2 running for their vehicles. I just noped right there and put my foot all the way down, and I genuinely didn't let it up until 5 or 6 miles later. Now the Camry was, at the time, pitiful all over. The best thing about it was the AC, assuming you didn't mind that the windshield wipers slowed down when it was on. And on mine, the suspension was excellent because it wasn't factory standard, and I put it in. Everything else was too light for a car that heavy, including the electrical, including the headlights. I was outrunning my brights the whole time. That road got twisty and narrow, and I nearly lost it more than once, throwing a tire off the road. I only let off the gas after I hit this old, overgrown pair of railroad tracks. They were on a short, paved berm. It was the old type of crossing that took mufflers like a road toll. I went airborne. And as the road crossed the tracks, it jogged to the left. The only thing that saved me from sailing straight into a pine tree was a last-minute jerk of the wheel as the front end of the car crested the bump. I ripped the mirror on that side half off. A glancing blow pulled one of the 3 bolts through the plastic mount. Another half-minute brought me to a padlocked chain-link fence for some army training area. There was a wooden sign to the right. That's why I saw the fence. I killed the engine and listened. I heard nothing but owls and wind. If I had heard engines, I would have been going through the fence. I turned around, drove safely over that railroad track, and then drove back the way I came and the only way I could, like a bomber, too fast, scared shitless, and expecting to run into more trouble than I could handle. By the time I got to the gravel parking lot, the road was a bit better, and I was going maybe 70 on the straights. The cars were gone. I went past where the rally was. The crosses were out and down. The rally was over. I kept going, back through the T-junction, back to the 41, and onto the interstate. Then I slowed down. Maybe 6 months after I passed my practical test and shortly after my 18th birthday, I was at a party at a friend's house. I wasn't drinking and offered to take a few people home when I left. At this point, I should state that we all stay in different villages, so I drove from mine to the second one to get to the party and then on to the third to take people home. This is important to remember. So as the party draws to a close and we leave, it's maybe 1 a.m., so it's as dark as it'll get. Like I said, I was driving between villages along dark, twisty roads, but I was at a steady speed. Just as we are about to get into the village we're heading to, I see what looks like a body in the middle of the road. Naturally, as a young and inexperienced driver, I poop myself and swerve to avoid this thing on the road. This was on a bend, so if anything was coming it would almost certainly been a bad smash. Thankfully there wasn't, and I came to a halt at the entrance to the village. My friend and I look at each other in silence before I eventually say, "Dude, we need to see if that guy is okay. If someone is going any faster he's gonna get killed." Reluctantly my friend agrees, so we park up in the entrance to a farm and slowly walk back into the darkness, hoping to find someone who's had a bit too much to drink or worse, a dead body. As I said, it's pitch black, so we use the torches on our phones to provide some light. As we emerged from the bend, we saw the guy, and to our horror, we saw a figure standing in all white, pointing at us. It doesn't move or say anything, it just points at us. We look at each other again in horror and look back at this figure, but now it's gone. We ran back to my car, unsure if this was maybe one of those gang things you see mentioned on Facebook and other social media. We floored it out of there, and I took a 15-minute detour to avoid that road when I drove home. We never saw that figure again, nor did we hear about it in the news. I still hesitate driving up to that village now in case such a thing happens again. We are both certain it was a person lying in there, and we both swear it got up. We both couldn't have imagined the same thing. He was drunk and I was stone cold sober. Surely we didn't imagine it, or did we? I was around 6. We took a trip to Mount Laurel, a very rural area, in other words, not 100% where, if I'm not mistaken. There's a shitton of forest till we get to whatever place we are going to. We left home late, which was in the afternoon, and soon after, the night had taken its course. As a kid, I always loved looking out the window, seeing all the trees rush past me, and seeing the terrain differ with each mile. But at night, it was a different story. My imagination created figures that lurked in the forest as my mother slowed her vehicle. As soon as those figures came onto the road, she would drive unaware of the hidden dangers that my eyes had seen. But soon after an hour or two, things started getting fucky quick. We had gotten lost, and the GPS went dead. Her phone was running out of battery, and she wanted to save the rest of the juice in case of an emergency. We continued driving and hoped someone in the area could help us, but it was dead quiet. No car in sight, no living person other than ourselves. We come up to this road that leads up to a road that had a white, dimly lit street lamp. We drove slowly to be cautious of incoming drivers. Even though we were in bumfuck nowhere, out of the right of the forest, an actual something emerges. Hunched over, wearing a white gown settled by the streetlight. The car halts a good number of feet away. Whatever it was, it panted heavily as if it were running from something. Hair covered its face. We couldn't turn back because the battery for the car was running low. We'd have no headlights if we went back. My mother proceeded to hit the gas. I'm talking full-on throat stomp bug squash hitting the gas. Me and my mother looked at the figure as we drove by, and it screamed. It screamed so blood-curdling. Me and my mother both screamed in the car. It lunged at us with its hand. And we were off. I could have sworn I saw claws on it. But anyway, my mother sped towards the road that leads uphill. It was a steep bump, and my mini acorns buckled into the middle strap of my car seat. Following a final scream. The end. Yeah, I was in a car seat at 6, and we ended up reaching a plaza and parking. I charged up the phone, and Uncle Rodney came to the rescue. Short story, drove with Mom. We got lost in the land of Oz. GPS died. There was no way of communication. A crazy mental patient lunged at us as we were driving past a creepy road. This happened one night at around 2 a.m., and it's probably not that scary or anything to anyone, but it still really bothers me to think about it to this day, and I still don't have much of an explanation for anything that happened. It also requires a little bit of backstory, I guess. My roommate and I were in the car, driving through central Alberta. We are not the going out and partying type. We are definitely more the type to consider getting in the car and driving in no particular direction a good Saturday night. We're both very spontaneous and adventurous and would love nothing more than to be able to just pick up and go at any given time, but we were in university and both had full-time jobs at that point, so the best we could do was get in her janky little Honda Civic that was older than us both and see where the highway would take us. One of my favorites of our adventures was a day where she picked me up and we ended up pulling off the highway to take pictures in a field with a bunch of hay bales, and then took pictures at the tiny little church on the side of the highway. We ended up driving a little farther forward, seeing signs for an upcoming town, and when we pulled off the highway, we realized it was actually a creepy little hamlet with a population of 62 people that looked straight out of a horror movie. That will eventually become relevant. Anyway, one evening we picked a little town about 30 minutes outside of the city we lived in and planned to drive there and explore the town at night. We didn't realize that the town was actually so small that it took about a minute to drive through it on the highway, and before we realized what happened, we totally missed the town. We couldn't get off the highway or turn around at that point, so we just kind of shrugged and decided to keep going until we hit the next small town. I laughed and said, "Hey, as long as we don't end up in a creepy little hamlet again." We just kept driving and eventually got to a point where we felt a little bit lost, but we're still enjoying the ride. We've got the radio on, we're chatting and just enjoying the drive, it's fine. After about 30 minutes of driving, my roommate remarked, "Okay, seriously. I don't know where we are, I don't even know if we're going north, south, or whatever." I wasn't really too concerned at that moment, really, what was the worst that could happen? We had a map in the glove box, we both had our phones and a couple chargers in the car, it's fine. We're just on an adventure. We've done this pretty much every second weekend for 5 years straight. We read the signs on the side of the road, and one of them said the name of what we assumed was the closest town, so we decided to go there. At one point, it had been about 45 minutes since we missed the first town, and we drove past a building on the highway. It was 2 a.m. and pitch black outside, and I didn't think anything of it until my roommate whipped towards me and blurted out, "We've been here before." I was really confused, and the urgency in her voice kind of freaked me out. "That's a church. We took pictures in that church and in that field across the highway. We've already been to the town we saw on that sign. It's that hamlet with, like, 50 people in it." I thought. Okay. That's super weird. All at once, after almost an hour of having no clue where we were or what direction we were driving, we knew exactly where we were, how far away from home we were, and what we were close to. We were accidentally on our way to the creepy little hamlet, which I made a joke about staying away from. We kind of laughed it off, but we both felt like it was really weird that we accidentally found a place we had already adventured to because neither of us even remembered what the name of the church was, and before that moment, I could never have gotten us back to that spot. Like I said, weird, but not super scary or anything. We kept driving to see what was ahead because the first time we were there, we turned around and went home after the church. We didn't really say anything to each other for almost 10 minutes, but in that time, I can't explain it, but I started feeling really, really uneasy. Like, something was just really wrong, and I did not want to be on that road anymore. I didn't say anything, though, because I've been known to get the heebie-jeebies over stupid stuff all the time, and I just figured it was a weird deja vu kind of thing because of the church. Anyway, after driving a bit, there were suddenly a bunch of street lights on the side of the road. My roommate and I looked at each other and said, "That's weird, because why would there be street lights on the side of a shitty little backroad highway?" We followed the road a bit longer because there was nowhere to turn off or turn around. The road eventually turned into a huge power plant, and at the exact same time, we both said, "That's creepy." Think Stranger Things creepy. Neither of us knew it was there, and there wasn't a single sign leading up to it until we were already on the road to the property. My roommate turned off the second she could and said, "I'm turning around. I don't want to be on this road anymore." We drove back at least 50 kilometers per hour over the speed limit until we got back into the city. When we got home, I was still really freaked out, so we sat up in bed for a bit together. I asked her if she felt as creeped out as I did. I fully expected her to say no, because this girl has nerves of steel. It takes a lot to even rattle her a little bit, never mind scare her. She told me, absolutely. She said that as soon as we drove past the church, she got this really uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach and immediately did not want to be on that road anymore. She described it as, you know how people say there's things that if you see them on the side of the road, you should get off that road as soon as possible? Like, if there's a car seat or something, you shouldn't stop for it because it could be really dangerous. And until we got back into the city, I had this really awful feeling that someone or something was going to come running into the middle of the road. I don't know why, but it was just so unsettling to me. Neither of us said anything until we got home, but we both had the exact same gut feeling that we needed to turn around and go home and that we did not want to be on that road anymore. I still don't really have an explanation for why it creeped me out so much, and we've gone adventuring like that many times since then, and I have never felt like that since. I really do think it was just a weird sense of déjà vu, and we both just silently freaked ourselves out about the weird sequence of events leading up to and following the situation. Either way, it still really freaks me out, and every once in a while, I have nightmares about driving down that power plant road.